Hey everybody, this is John for MTG Nexus, doing quick deck tech on the deck we're going to be running through in the league today. This is the list that I alluded to at the ending of my update from my MCQ performance this past weekend. Changes I made from my list basically were I had cut a Searing Blaze and a Screw the Critics to get 2 Skullcracks in the main. This was kind of an answer to all of the various Batterskull decks running around now. Wanted to get 4 copies of Skullcrack back in the 75, don't really have room in the sideboard, mainly because I'm stubborn and don't like losing to decks like Dredge, so I'm still holding on to the rest in pieces in the sideboard, especially since I've seen Dredge decks in other decks that I play sometimes online. So, holding on to the rest in pieces because Dredge did perform fairly well this past weekend. I believe it won the Modern Classic at the SCG. Did well in a couple of other smaller events, so Dredge is still kind of a thing, and I absolutely refuse to lose that deck if I can possibly prevent it. Beyond that, Stoneforge Mystic decks obviously are a big thing, as well as the Urza decks. Both of those decks have some form of built-in life gain, so hence the 4 Skullcracks in the deck. And as a friendly reminder before we get too far into the video, don't forget if you like what you're seeing on the channel, please consider subscribing, giving us a thumbs up, and leaving a constructive comment down below. Beyond that, this is the same list we've largely been working with for the last, couple of months. Grim Lavamancer's back in the main. Once again, I kind of explained that in the MCQ video. Basically, I want an onboard way to kill Stoneforge Mystic. And if Grim Lavamancer can come down on 1, and a lot of these Stoneforge Mystic decks are only packing like maybe 4 Path Exile, maybe like a Winds of Abandon, especially the blue-white version. Having a way on board to kill their Stoneforge Mystic that doesn't involve resolving it through a Force of Negation, I think is a very huge boon. So any little things I can do to kind of improve that matchup, that's part of the reason Grim Lavamancer's back in the main deck. Only running 19 lands right now. I'm not a huge fan of Fiery Islet, number 5 and 6 can lands whenever you're running into a lot of burn and mono red prowess mirrors. I like the 4 Lightning Helix for that particular reason as well. Beyond that, basically the same package we've been running 4 of almost everything except for Searing Blaze and Skewer the Critics. Both cards slightly underperform at times. Blaze, obviously, you have to have targets, and it's a pretty reasonable card even against these Stoneforge Mystic control decks. Skewer the Critics, I think a 3 is fine. 4 sometimes feels like it gets stuck in your hand too much. So I think seeing 1 a game is fairly nice, but seeing more than 1 can be a little bit awkward. It's often a card that I bottom in these burn mirrors. And then beyond that, the 2 Path Exile feels a little low right now, but it's kind of a concession. There aren't too many decks we want to bring in more than 2 against right now. There's not a whole lot of humans out there, etc. A Core Firewalker, same reason I have the 4 Lightning Helix and only the 4 can lands. Lots of red mirrors going on around right now. 2 copies of Skullcrack supplement the 2 in the main deck, 3 copies of Rest in Peace, mainly for Storm and Dredge, both decks that I've seen pop up since the bannings. Smash the Smithereens, this is also a concession to Stoneforge Mystic decks as well as the Urza and Hardened Scales decks that have been popping up around. Searing Blaze, pretty reasonable in a lot of spots. This is definitely a card that I could see trimming or cutting from the sideboard for other things, but I think for right now, the 2 of still fine. It's good against a lot of these other Stoneforge Mystic decks, things like Death and Taxes. I've seen like a Bant Flash version of Stoneforge with like Ice Fang Coatls and such, and there's quite a few targets between Noble Hierarch, Ice Fang Coatl, and Stoneforge Mystic itself in that deck. And then Exquisite Firecraft, this once again, for some reason there's a surge in Grixis Death Shadow I've noticed. I'm not sure if the deck has a decent matchup against these Stoneforge Mystic decks or what's going on with that, but that, along with the blue-white Stoneblade decks and just regular control, it's nice to have this kind of uncounterable thing to kind of finish off the game. Say if you're able to Skullcrack their 1 Batterskull activation or Batterskull attack, and then finish them off the following turn with an Exquisite Firecraft. And that's pretty much the deck. Let's get into the matches. Alright, we're back for game number 1, match number 1. Fortunately, we're on the play. Saying, if this were a mull to 6 and I could put one, excuse me, put back one of these lands, I think this hand would be fine. I think on the play, we're too apt to run out of gas quickly, so this is a mull. This hand's very similar to the last one, but we get to at least put back one of these lands, so I think it'll end up being one of the Sunbaked Canyons. Nope, I guess I put back the fetch land, which is interesting. Lead on Lava Spike, pass turn. It leads on Temple of Epiphany, which is a weird one. We go ahead and drop the Eidolons. That's usually pretty good against any type of blue-red deck. Another Temple. Lonely Sandbar. So at this point I'm thinking Lotus Field or Twiddle Storm. Lava Spike them. Go ahead and... I was going to Boros Charm them there, but I don't really want them to... Seismic Assault. So... this is the Seismic Swans list. For those of you that aren't familiar with the deck, because it only pops up on occasion, because it's, some people consider it obviously kind of a very budget deck, but the deck tries to combine the card Seismic Assault or Magmatic Insight with the card Swans of Born Argul. Swans of Burn Argul has a weird templating where it's a 4/3. However, despite the fact that it looks infinitely boldable, it's not. Anytime Swans is dealt damage, the control... it's either... I think it's the Swans controller draws that many cards, or the Source's controller draws that many cards. I can't remember which. We'll have to see whenever it pops up later in the matchup. Basically, their game plan is to Seismic Assault, play Swans, target the Swans with a bunch of lands, draw a bunch of cards off of that, and then eventually turn around once they have enough lands in hand and Seismic Assault their opponent to death. So, alternatively, they also play Magmatic Insight, which it comes down for a cheaper mana cost, but requires 1 red to activate each time, as opposed to just being able to discard the land. Some people are familiar with Seismic Assault, Seismic Loam, very similar to what the card Renin 6 can do. This could also be a strategy potentially implemented, but it's a lot slower. This one's a more combo-esque version, but the one downside to the deck is that it has to run an absurdly high land count. It runs something along the lines of 40 lands in the main deck, I think. Go ahead and kill them here, and we got the turn 4 win. On to game number 2. Back for game number 2 here. Once again, 5-lander, it's time to mulligan. This seems a lot better. I think the put back here is one of the 2-mana spells, but I guess we'll see. Yeah, I put back Lightning Helix, which may or may not be a mistake in a deck that's trying to kill us with damage here. So, get the Swift Spear out there. Opponent gets Molten Vortex down. This is similar to Seismic Assault. Comes down for 1, but does require a red each time. This does make our creature plan potentially much worse if they just start chucking lands at our creatures here. We play Swift Spear, and I try to save our permanents. They go ahead and have a Stubborn Denial, which kind of terrifically blows us out here. That's 2 damage that potentially could have gone to the face. Instead, 4 damage that could have gone to the face. Instead, I used to try to protect our creatures. Opponent plays actual Seismic Assault, but they are running low on lands, which is important. The one other key card in their deck is the card Treasure Hunt, which allows them to potentially draw a bunch of lands. Go to attacks here. They go to 7. We skewer them. They assault our thing. I could play Eidolon here, but yeah, see, this is what I wasn't sure about the templating on Swans. It says that source's controller draws cards equal to the damage prevented this way. So there's actually a chance what I was supposed to do here was actually to Helix the Swans to draw 3 cards. but I didn't do that because I thought that my opponent would draw this many. And then I pass the turn. I try to bolt our opponent in response. They Stubborn Denial. This might have been a premature concession here, but basically what was going on is if this connected to our opponent's creature, they were going to draw 2 cards, and that would have left them with 3 cards in hand. I'm not sure what the last one was. Like I said, this is probably a premature concession, but basically what happens is they target this, they draw 2 cards, they draw another land, they draw another 2 cards, etc., etc. So each time they draw a land, and even with the Stubborn Denials in their deck at this point, their deck's probably about 37 lands. So this is why I conceded here, because I'm just probably basically dead at this point. Before game number 3, I'll go ahead and pull up the deck list, but that's pretty much it for game number 2. On to game number 3. I apologize for the nasally thing. I'm a bit under the weather. The weather's been changing a lot lately. We've got like 70 during the day and 50 at night, so I'll have the fan on at night, and I'm starting to get a bit of a cold as a result. So, anywho, so this is the deck. Typically running about 40 lands. Lot of cycling lands. Lonely Sandbar, Forgotten Caves, that was one of the big things they got. They also have 4 copies of Temple of Epiphany. They have 4 copies of Seismic Assault, 3 copies of Molten Vortex. We did see, I don't know if we see Throes of Chaos in there. Basically it's a cascade spell that allows them to see other things. And I think the big thing off this is the fact that it has Retrace. So, because they have so many lands here. The big things they want to find off of Throes of Chaos, because they can't find Swans, is Treasure Hunt and Days Undoing, or additional copies of these. Treasure Hunt, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-land card, then put all those cards revealed into your hand. So, basically they get to draw a bunch of lands. Treasure Hunt can draw them 3, 5, 7, 8 lands. Then Days Undoing is just kind of a way to refill their hand and then potentially kill us if they have a Seismic Assault in play. So, this is what their deck's trying to do. They have some numbers of counter spells. We saw the multiple copies of Stubborn Denial in that one game. Teutonic Reformation gives all their lands cycling, and then just other random things like Anger of the Gods. Sphinx's Tutelage can be an interesting thing. Basically, every time they draw a card, they mill us out. That way, they have like some out against like Infinite Combo or something. Didn't see them bring in Jace Welder of Mysteries. I guess this is something you'd bring in against Control, but it's basically what their deck is trying to do. On to game number 3. Game number 3, we're on the play. Once again, got a mull because we're low on. Got too many lands. This hand's the opposite problem. Creature heavy draw could be negated by their ability to find and play a Seismic Assault or something here, but I still think this is a hand worth keeping. Probably put back the Lavamancer. It's kind of the slowest card going on here. Needless to say, we didn't have a ton to sideboard in this matchup, so they do have the Seismic Assault, so we want to get in our creature damage as early as possible. They actually have Molten Vortex, which is even worse. Trying to overload their mana here, get in with some creatures. They have Swans as well. They have 1 land to chuck at our thing. Chuck another thing. They get punished here by going after the Swift Spear. And then they don't have the untapped land. They finally kill our thing. They're using the Goblin Guy here to draw them additional lands, which makes sense. Go ahead and do that. Suspend the Rift Bolts. There's the Swans. Go ahead and bolt their face. Skewer the critics, put them to 1. Here comes the Throes of Chaos. They see a Molten Vortex. I think this was foolish because we know they had Seismic Assault in their hand. They might have been trying to hit a copy of Treasure Cove here. So now they're tapped out. They have 2 Molten Vortexes in play. We crack the Sunbaked Canyon, find a Boros Charm, untap, and then just kill them. So, kind of a close matchup considering. Obviously, there was that punt last game where I could have like aimed a Lightning Helix at this and drawn 3 cards and possibly killed them that way. But Swans of Burnout Goal is not a card you see a ton. I probably haven't seen it in the better part of 6 months or so. But that's one of the things when you've been playing Modern or been playing an archetype for a while, you see like corner case scenarios where you run into decks where you're like, I have never seen this deck before. How does this matchup go? It's kind of nice, like when you're playing the same archetype for 2, 3, 4 years. You know, even if it's not the only deck you play, you'll see like corner case scenarios like this, or decks like Ad Nauseam that most people don't play a lot of. Learning how to play those matchups can be really effective because a lot of people get their edges by playing those decks, by people not being prepared for the matchup. So, anyways, let's get on to match number 2. Back for match number 2, we'll be on the draw this game, unfortunately. This hand's pretty reasonable. Once again, it doesn't have Burn's best starts, which are the 1-drop creature center draws. But on the draw, sometimes those can be negated by removal spells anyway. Opponent's Crack Scalding turn. Basic Island, Astrolabe. So either Snow or Urza would be my guess at this point. Their basic island, they play Mind Stone, so it looks like we're up against a Urza strategy. So, gotta be mindful of their life gain here. Just trying to be as mana efficient as possible. When it plays Urza, use the Golem and the Astrolabe to play Sword of the Meek. So there's 1 card off from comboing us. Go ahead and put them to 2 here, which really doesn't change a whole lot. They get Goblin Engineer to put the Foundry in the graveyard. Fortunately, they can't activate Engineer. They equip it. And we go ahead and bolt them. They could have potentially attacked us with Urza there, but I guess it was just a matter of whether they untapped with Thopter Foundry or not. Generally a close matchup. You saw, they were like 1 turn away from untapping and comboing us. This could, even if this was, actually, if this was... No, they wouldn't have been able to... Would they have been able to produce... No, I think they were short of producing the actual mana to put this into play if this would have been Stoneforge Mystic. So, Engineer Mystic. Engineer is actually able to go and get Thopter Foundry. Stoneforge Mystic would not have been able to, so that's 1 advantage for Goblin Engineer here, being able to go and get the both halves of the combo, as opposed to just one side. So, close game, close matchup. Let's get on to sideboarding and game number 2 of match number 2. Back for game number 2. Once again, we're on the draw. This hand, pretty reasonable. We have a lot of 1 mana spells to get out of our hand pretty quickly. Once again, we're lacking the early creatures for pressure. But I still think this hand's reasonable enough in the matchup as long as they don't assemble the combo. I've actually played against this matchup a couple of times now. Sideboarding, boarded out the Searing Blazes and a Lavamancer, brought in the 2 smashes and 2 of the 3 copies of Rest in Peace. Rest in Peace shuts down the infinite part of the combo. Smash obviously relevant against the artifact portion of the deck, which obviously is quite a bit of it. So, go ahead and do this. So I don't play Rest in Peace yet. There's no reason to until they've assembled the actual combo, which they weren't capable of doing quite yet. Untap. Play Rest in Peace now, keep them from being able to combo off. They can gain a little bit of life with a Thopter Foundry, but here comes Urza. They go ahead and play another Urza. Just trying to get some big bodies on the field, kill us through damage, because they can't do the infinite combo stuff anymore. Getting some life. Just go ahead and pass the turn. Opponent attacks, gotta do the math. That's 10, 12, 13 damage. We're at... puts us to 2 here, which is fine. Because then we can use Lightning Helix to bump ourselves back up to 5, and then still cast all our spells to kill them over the next turn or so. Opponent plays this post-combat. Yeah, that would have been lethal without the Lightning Helix. We go ahead and Lightning Helix them. We go ahead and gain a life here, which is moderately relevant, but yet not. So they sack a Thopter Founder itself, put themselves up to 9. Unfortunately, we just kind of have the nuts here, so. And put them to 1 exactly, or -1. So I don't know if they had the sword in their hand. It's possible they could have assembled a combo without the Rest in Peace in play. But, you know, they still gained quite a bit of life. We had a very fortunate draw, and we're still able to kill them on turn 5. I've played this matchup now probably, I want to say 5 times, 4 or 5 times. Well, first couple of times I lost the matchup. I think I was over sideboarding. I was bringing in Path. I was bringing in, I was bringing in Path, and I think I was still trying to leave in like some amount of creature interaction. And as a matter of course, for the most part, the Urza and the Sai don't necessarily matter. They put pressure on, but Urza's not coming down usually until turn 3. And at that point, the token's not able to attack until their turn 4. So the earliest they can kill you generally without the combo is turn 5. So as long as you're able to avoid or counter the life gain from the combo, their earliest turn kills are 5, and Burn's general like slowest kills are turn 5. So as long as you can manage like timely reinforcements, if they have it in the sideboard, which I have seen at least one opponent have, I think the matchup is pretty reasonable, even on this like 3-color variant that we saw here. And obviously, as their mana base gets more stretched, if they're running the 4-color version, it's even a little bit better. But their mana is pretty functional even for a 4-color deck between Astrolabe and the 5-color artifact land. I can see the land in my head, but I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head. But yeah, pretty solid matchup. I think the matchup's close, but I do think Burn has a slight edge depending on the build of the Urza deck. Just got to manage the Thopter Sword combo as best you can, and obviously understand that one of the key factors of Thopter Foundry is it's only non-creature or non-token. Artifact creature token. Sacrifice a non-token artifact. So any of these creatures they're sacking or getting, they can't actually sack to continue the chain. So, once they're out of actual artifacts, they're kind of limited on what they can do. But Urza is a severely messed up card. Getting a bunch of these Thopters in play, and because Urza's ability is what makes them create mana, even something like Stony Silence doesn't actually stop these guys from tapping for mana. So they're still able to like tap all these guys to, use the other activated ability of shuffle a library, flip the top card. So lots of shenanigans this card's capable of. I think this is going to be a staple of modern moving forward. So better just get used to whatever deck you're playing to have a plan against Urza. Anyways, on to match number 3. We're on the draw for game number 1 of match number 3. This hand's reasonable. One notable thing is a lack of something to do on turn 1. But other than that, we've got Eidolon and a bunch of very powerful spells here. Once again, Scare the Critics being a little bit awkward in these kind of hands. But opponent plays a Hallowed Fountain and passes. Alright, so we drew the Wonder out that we were looking for. Once again, one little thing against these blue-white X decks. Generally speaking, you want to leave your basics in your deck as much as possible, so things like Path to Exile or Field of Ruin, can't get your mana. Teferi here is a little bit noticeable. Some of the early versions of Stoneblade were trying to still make Teferi work, but Teferi is generally an indicator that your opponent's not on Stoneforge Mystic, but not concrete yet, obviously. Go ahead and attack, try to bait out a copy of Path to Exile. Instead they play Snapcaster Mage here. Show us the Force of Negation, which that could still mean blue-white or blue-white Stoneblade. I was tempted to Bolt here to save the Goblin Guide, because obviously they're light on creature answers. That's why the hesitation there. I ultimately decide that landing the Eidolon's just more important if they don't really have any answers to creatures. Eidolon's going to be even more annoying for them, so just get the Eidolon down. There's the Field of Ruin I was talking about. Go ahead and shock that in. That way we have maximum availability of mana. They're going to Vendilion click here, click us. In response, I believe I do Bolt here, just because they're so low on answers to this card. They take a Boros Charm, give us a Lavamancer, which is actually even worse for them, theoretically. I do believe... Play the Lavamancer here. So they shock in. This generally indicates Supreme Verdict, which it does, which is unfortunate, but it did deal them 2 damage to do so, which I'm not sure Eidolon alone would have been enough to trigger, but alas. Go ahead and get the Boros Charm. They Force of Negation that, which didn't matter. We knew about the Force. They pitched a Cryptic Command. They're down to 1 card in hand, so, and that's the Teferi, which fortunately they did not rip a source for. Let's go ahead and pass the turn. They hit their land, they play Terfuffles. I go ahead and hit them in response because there's no counterspell they could have there. I play Goblin Guide, they mana leak it, I pay for mana leak, and they're just dead. So, they showed us cards that could be in both Stoneblade and just regular blue-white control, but I do think that this Teferi is generally indicating that they are regular blue-white control, and so therefore, let's go over the sideboarding, and I'll show you that I think I boarded as if they are regular blue-white control. So as far as sideboarding, I did not bring in the Smashes, and I boarded out all the Searing Blazes, and along with boarded out a copy of Riftbolt and the 3 Searing Blazes for 2 copies of Skullcrack and 2 copies of Firecraft. Once again, I was kind of operating under the assumption that our opponent was not on Stoneblade. This hand's a little bit risky. We're on the draw, so it's a little bit less so. But I think just this combination of these 4 spells plus the mountain's fine. So I do go ahead and keep this hand. Draw another 1-drop creature, which once again, that's our best start against them, especially when they're showing us an opt here. We reveal Logic Knot, which they opted away. Once again, they opt again. We're still not drawing our second land, but I still think this is fine. Opponent passed us, which was nice of them to give us our second land drop. They play Narset, which is mildly annoying. It's possible I was supposed to kill the Narset here. I just decided to take the chance to unload on them pretty much. This is the gamble of, does Narset find a timely reinforcements? They opt, which I think was a mistake. They find a Path to Exile. Hoping to draw out the path here, which is fine. Go ahead and Lava Spike them. They're going to just let it resolve, so they're dead basically. There's a Monastery Mentor, don't really care about that. Bolts to try to draw out any type of nonsense. But I think they're just dead here, because there's nothing, to my knowledge, there's nothing out of blue-white here that stops an uncounterable Exquisite Firecraft, and once again, Exquisite Firecraft kind of coming up big in these blue-white matchups. They could very easily have had a Force of Negation or something in their hand. I've actually bluffed through an Exquisite Firecraft that only had one spell in the graveyard before. I think it was just like, okay, that wasn't supposed to resolve. But once again, we did not see anything out of them that leads us to indicate that they are Stoneblade. So blue-white control is a much easier matchup than blue-white Stoneblade, but I still think there's very similar things going on. I think the one big thing is, let me go ahead and actually pull up the sideboarding guide that I do on Patreon. Short plug out here. If you're interested in a frequently up-to-date sideboard guide here, I do one every 1st and 15th of every month. Was a day late this month simply because of the holiday, etc. So, the big thing, and I'll just go ahead and pull up a small portion of my thought process here. So, Stoneblade, a lot of the same things. I board out Rift Bolts, Skewer, and Boros Charms. So I do a little bit more sideboarding against Blue-White Stoneblade. Basically, the big thing is Skewer and Rift Bolt can both get got by 3 Fairy. And Skewer is a little bit awkward when you're trying to specifically kill Stoneblade, because it basically requires you to already have a creature in play, or have an additional 1 mana spell like a Lava Spike to kill the thing, and then you want to bring in the Skullcracks because of the life gain, you want to bring in the Smash to Smithereens because of the equipment, and then obviously Exquisite Firecraft because it's a blue-based deck. And then obviously you saw with the blue-white thing, you don't bring in the Smashes, and you're cutting Searing Blazes instead because they're more of a dead card. It's possible that I should be shaving like even one of the Searing Blazes against Stoneblade, but that's still something I haven't had enough testing with for right now. But that's kind of the thought process behind Stoneblade versus blue-white control, if you can kind of determine or happen to know which variant they're on. Anyways, on to match number 4, will we keep the undefeated hope alive? Here for match number 4 of this league, still far. We started out 3-0. Sounds very, very good. On the play with the double Monastery Swift Spear and a spell to potentially boost them up. Once again, Skewer a little bit awkward in the sequencing. Pressure our opponent. Amulet. Yay. Use the Lava Spike here. Opponent goes Ancient Stirrings. Finds an Amulet of Vigor. They get a Chump Blocker, play another Amulet. Opponent goes in Chump Blocks. Hold up Skullcrack here, try to prevent the life gain. And so we're about to get turn 3. So opponent, basically what happens is Amulet Titan is a deck that utilizes Amulet of Vigor to untap these lands. But if your opponent has 2 amulets in play, you're dead. If you're at 20 or less. And right now, with the highest we can get to is this. So basically what happens is they grab Primetime Daddy. Okay, they don't go for the combo here? Huh. I actually punted right here. Maybe. So... Oh, okay. I get it. So... we had 2 mana here. And I scooped before I should have. So what I was fearing was my opponent was going to go grab Boros Garrison, Slayer Stronghold, give this haste twice over. Because these triggers stack, they get to tap and untap it twice. So they would have been able to give this +4/+0 in haste, triggered again, get Vesuva and Slayer? No, not Slayer Stronghold. The double strike land, I forget what it's called off the top of my head. And then 20s. But what our opponent here did was next leveled us. They were afraid of 2 bold effects killing their Titan, so they went and got the necessary lands to be able to pay for their pack the following turn. Kind of next level play by our opponent. I don't think we would have been able to punish them. We would be able to put them to 8, and then untap, swing for 4/4. Actually, there's a chance we could have actually been able to kill them here. If we drew another land, we could have gone, say, Lightning Helix end step, Skull Crack plus Skewer, 4 and 4 would have gotten through if they're exactly lethal. So I think our opponent was actually playing a little too scared here. They maybe should have gone for the kill, but I conceded prematurely here because they did have the kill if they would have gotten the right combination of cards, but they were playing around double bolt here, which extremely unlikely, but smart heads-up play by our opponent, but would leave them dead to us top decking the right thing. It's possible they should have went and gotten Radiant Fountain or Kabira Crossroads instead. That way they would have gained 2 life and put themselves out of range, but once again with the multiple Skull Cracks in hand, we would have had that covered as well. But still, next level play by our opponent, maybe thinking too far ahead, and they should just maybe have gone for the kill, and I conceded to what wasn't a kill on board. So talking through paying attention at all times to see what your opponent does. Anyways, on to game number 2. Here for game number 2, I'm still experimenting with testing with sideboard plans against some of these decks. Amulet Titan's one of them. This isn't the exact same sideboard plan that I use in my sideboarding guide, but basically I'm still experimenting. The Amulet decks have a weird combination of cards because they have their accelerators. I watch one of the bigger proponents, Francisco, I forget what exactly his name is, a lot on YouTube and his Twitch, but basically their acceleration plan changes all the time. Sometimes they run multiple copies of Coalition Relic plus the 4 Amulet. So when you see that and they're running the Karn package, sometimes it's worth bringing in Smash to Smithereens. Some of these lists are like a Hive Mind deck with like Lotus Bloom, just the turn 4, well ideally turn 4 Black Lotus on Suspend 3. So there's a lot of like fluidity in the plans of the decks, and when you see Lotus Bloom, oftentimes they're not playing the Tribe Scout package. So even within like some of these archetypes that there's a definitive like 1 or 2 builds, there can be some fluidity as to what cards you bring in. This particular time I boarded out a Searing Blaze and a Grim Lavamancer along with a couple of Rift Bolts to bring in the other 2 Skull Cracks and 2 copies of Path to Exile. Wanted to have an outs to a Resolve Titan. One of the things they've also been cutting is sometimes they're only running 1 Pactification, and sometimes they even cut it in a matchup like this. Though I think it's foolish, especially against Burn, if you're seeing a resurgence in Deflecting Palm, which some people have been advocating even after the bannings here. On the play, good solid hand. I do have one of my remaining Searing Blazes in my hand, so if they have a Scout on 1, we have that covered pretty well. Instead, they just have the Amulet draw again. Gonna do the thing, play the Eidolon out. They play another Amulet, which is really, really scary. Continue to pressure them. Continue to hold up Skull Crack here. Don't want them getting life if we can avoid it. They don't tap mana, which leads me to believe they don't have a Nazusa or anything here. I go ahead and Boros Charm them to end step. Go ahead and swing in here. They take the chump block. I could potentially once again have pushed damage, but still trying to hold up Skull Crack. They are playing a Thragdaterson, which I'm glad we have the Skull Crack here, and then as long as we draw a land, we get to untap and kill them. Which unfortunately we don't, so we have to... This is where I feel they have a Titan. Fortunately, deck that's entirely predicated on drawing Primeval Titans didn't have the turn 3 kill this time, and we just get to untap and kill them. So, and then they show us Summoner's Pact here for some reason. 1, 2... Yeah, I think they should have went and gone and grabbed a Titan here. 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, they definitely would have had enough. Just the Slayer Stronghold would have prevented them from killing us out of nowhere. But I do think it was something to note that They did have the Summoner's Pact. They could have gone and gotten either an Obstinate Baloth or Primeval Titan with the life gain lands, with the Slayer Stronghold to prevent them from killing us. Because this is already being on the battlefield, kind of keeps them from being able to kill us. Wait, did it? Or is this them showing us that they punted back? 2, 3, untap, tap, untap. Yeah, they could have went and gotten the kill here. Potentially. I mean, we did have the Path to Exile to cover it, but they still could have went and gotten the kill here. Go grab Titan with this. Grab Boros Garrison, Slayer Stronghold here, attack us. Maybe I guess we could have prevented enough damage, so it wouldn't have been as big a deal. But still, them showing us the Summoner's Pact showed us they could have went and gotten a Titan, but chose not to. Anyways, on to game number 3. Game number 3 here will be on the draw. Obviously a mulligan, no lands. This would be an ideal hand if we were able to guarantee ripping lands off the top. I think especially on the draw, you got to keep a high risk, high reward hand in this matchup. I choose to keep this hand, I believe, and get rid of Boros Charm? Yep. Boros Charm, obviously the extra damage is great, but if we hit the second land, Skullcrack is much more valuable. Start pressuring them with the Swift Spear. They have a fairly slow draw. We don't draw another land, but we do draw another creature. They show us another Teleria West, so we know they have 2 Teleria West in hand. The Ancient Stirrings hit a Gemstone Mine. Not quite as good a draw for them this time around. We finally draw our second land. Could have been a mistake here to not hold up Skullcrack, potentially, as they could have had like a Thragtusk or something. Well, not Thragtusk. I guess they could have had, whatchamacallit, and then they show us, they transmute Teleria West, and then we untap and kill them. So, they were close to setting up the kill here. Double Amulet next turn with a bounce land would have been potentially lethal. So, we kill them on turn 4. They had set up for a slow turn 5 kill. We got a little bit lucky in game 2 and game 3 that they had their slower draws. Oftentimes this can be an unfavorable matchup for Burn because they do have a lot of life gain in their decks. They do have the ability to go, usually there's a life gain land somewhere in the deck. They didn't show it to us at any point during this matchup, but it's usually like a Kabira Crossroads or a Radiant Fountain, and then in combination with their bounce lands, they're able to play it over and over and over again. Often gaining 2 life per turn. Sometimes if they have a Sakura Trap Scout in the mix, they can do it during our turn as well. So even if we're able to Skullcrack them, they can gain another 2 life in response to stuff. So lots of little tricks and stuff with Amulet. They're a very interesting deck to watch. I would say Amulet's probably the single most technical deck there is in Modern. Trying to think what deck even comes remotely close. Grixis Death Shadow, maybe. That's got a ton of tricky sequencing. But the Amulet, learning the math and all the basics on the Amulet is kind of insane. I've played the deck a few times, and it's a really difficult deck to play and understand. But very rewarding and very high upside deck, especially in the current meta with a lot of mid-range decks, Tron, and like these aggro decks. It generally has fairly good matchups against. Its weaker matchups are usually things like Storm, obviously Ponza, some of the corner case decks that can really like punish it for what it's trying to do. But that can be very explosive and can be very powerful. So, and it's another example of something that leads me to believe Phoenix can be brought back, is the fact that Amulet was a deck that, had a very severe piece of it banned with Summer Bloom, and still came back and was a very functional deck when a few dedicated people continued working on the deck, and I don't want to say perfected it, but got back to a very modern power level. So, anyways, on to match number 5. One more match, can we stay undefeated? Back here for match number 5. Unfortunately, we're on the draw again. This hand, pretty solid hand, except the 4-land thing. If this was like one more spell, this hand would be close to ideal. So obviously it's a mulligan. This hand, high risk, high reward, 3 1-drop creatures, a couple 1-drop spells, plus a Skullcrack. I think I end up pitching Skullcrack here? Yeah. It's like the one card we can't, and then we immediately see Raging Ravine and immediately regret our life choices. Fortunately, we know this is going to at least get in for a hit. Opponent just kind of holds up that. Like, do you have 2 1-drop interaction spells? You have a Fatal Push, do you have a Bolt 2? You do not. We've shown them a Tarmogoyf, so Tarmogoyf's going to be able to come down here, hold down the board. You just suspend the Rift Bolt, don't attack. They have a Scavenging Ooze. Their Goyf's still a small boy. We go ahead and kill Scoos, because sorcery wouldn't be able to kill that. We finally draw our second land. Suspend the Rift Bolt, play a Lava Spike. At this point I've decided the creature plan is kind of worthless, so attacks in. I think we're going to get hit by a Kolaghan's Command here. Play the Swift Spear out. See Kolaghan's Command. The Kolaghan's Command the correct one here, because if they try to Kolaghan's Command this, and we have a spell in response, I use this opportunity to Boros Charm them, put them to 3, and basically any spell here is lethal. They go ahead and draw step us, which I take the opportunity to find a bolt and kill them, which I didn't even have to crack there. I could have just waited till the main phase, but I did it in response trying to save the Swift Spear anyway, and then the bolt obviously off the top was kind of lethal, so got a little bit lucky there. But you know, sometimes these can lands come in handy. A lot of times they've won us several games that just regular lands we would have been dead. So sometimes flooding out with a can land can be a nice thing, because those redraws have been kind of important at times. So anyways, on to game number 2 of the final match. As far as sideboarding against Jund, boarding out the Searing Blazes and the 1 copy of Grim Lavamancer, brought in the 2 copies of Path to Exile and the 2 additional Skullcracks. Path to clear out, you know, big guys like Tarmogoyf and the Grown Scavenging Ooze, and we also board out the copies of Searing Blaze because they're generally not very good against Jund. Jund's base creatures in the post-board games against us are usually Tarmogoyf, Scavenging Ooze, and potentially something like a Kalitas or Tireless Tracker. And yet it's kind of situational about when you can catch a Scavenging Ooze or a Tireless Tracker with 3 damage sometimes. So generally don't try to aim my burn spells at my opponent or at my opponent's creatures in this matchup if I can avoid it, because generally, especially Tarmogoyf, it's really difficult to kill. Play out the Goblin God. I suspect it's just going to die here, but opponent cast Weather the Storm, which is actually... Why is it getting 3 triggers? Oh, Rift Bolt, Goblin Guide, Weather the Storm. It's actually worse for us that they didn't have a kill spell here. Nice timing by our opponent there. Go ahead and cast Skewer the Critics. They have Kolaghan's Command. Card, I know it's a 2-for-1, but I like kind of question its effectiveness in this matchup. Continue to just spew our hand as much as possible. They Bloodbraid Elf into a Scavenging Ooze, and I just kind of scoop to that. They're at 12. We can most put them to 9. They have 7 hasty power here, even if I block. And they've got 1, 2, 3 creatures in the graveyard and 2 green sources, so I would need to have drawn a Bolt to deal with the Scavenging Ooze, and then meanwhile we have the 4 or 5 Tarmogoyf jumping down on us, so, and then they're 1 land away from acting Raging Ravine. Just once they get into this kind of a board state, it's just too hard to catch up, and then that Weather the Storm getting them 9 life was just absolutely insane. Without that card, I think this matchup is, I don't want to say extremely positive for Burn, but without them having Weather in the Storm in their sideboard, I think the matchup is a lot better for Burn. Because their other best card is Collective Brutality, and a lot of times Collective Brutality is a lot like Culligan's Command. I keep getting Grimflare's pronunciation of it. That's another great YouTuber. If you like green black X decks, he keeps pronouncing it Culligan's Command or something. And it's just like that pronunciation gets stuck in my head, and I'm like, it's Culligan's Command. Anyways, on to game number 3, and trying to keep the 5-0 dream alive. Game number 3, match number 5 against a 50-50 deck in the format. What other way you want to have it, right? So one thing I wanted to touch on before we get into the final game of the final match. A lot of people question about bringing in Rest in Peace against Jund. There's two considerations with Rest in Peace. Rest in Peace can turn Tarmogoyf, which is their premier threat against us, into basically a paperweight in the matchup. But the problem is with Rest in Peace is, unless you specifically have Monastery Swiftspear in play and they don't have a kill spell, Rest in Peace is taking a turn off. And it only shuts down specifically Tarmogoyf and potentially Scavenging Ooze. One thing I was just watching there is a consideration for leaving in Searing Blaze because of Bloodbraid Elf, but I think that's kind of a corner case scenario, and by that point they've pressured our hands with discard spells or things of that like, so it's not worth keeping in a spell we have to hold until probably turn 4 for it to be most effective. So, early pressure, Goblin Guide, excellent start. We have a Skull Crack, so put our opponent to 18 here. They show us a Bloodstained Mire, despite the fact that we know they have an Overgrown Tomb, which likely means they're going to kill this Goblin Guide. That's why I didn't play the Eidolon pre-combat. It's one thing people debate whether to play Eidolon pre or post-combat. Oftentimes I'd rather have the Eidolon live, especially if your opponent is only likely to have one kill spell. Don't play any spells here pre-combat. So one mistake our opponent made here, you want to do this main phase with most kill spells simply because something like Boros Charm here could potentially blow you out, but it's kind of whatever. Our opponent does the thing. They accelerate us, take 2 damage. Suspend the Rift Bolt, play the Lava Spike. I want to leave up Skullcrack no matter what here, especially since they showed us Weather the Storm. That's why you don't see me casting Lightning Helix on end step. I don't want to give them an opportunity to cast that one. I suspect they have other things in their hand anyway. That's why I just cast Bolt here and pass the turn instead of trying to go for the kill. I'm going to place a Scavenging Ooze. There was a moment where the shields were kind of down. And obviously, this Eidolon being in the graveyard means that they can get out of bolt range, which that's fine. I go ahead and cast this. Force them to make an activation either with Scavenging Ooze or the Weather the Storm here. And with Weather the Storm on the stack, I go ahead and Skullcrack them, put them to 0. So Weather the Storm is a card. Some Jund decks run it, some don't. It's a card you should be mindful of and try to play around as best you can. Got us real good game number 2 there. I don't know, there's a ton we could have done to play around it. I guess not deploying that Goblin Guide, but I don't think there's too many other opportunities to deploy Goblin Guide after turn 2 or turn 3 that don't result in some issues. But heck of a way to get the 5-0. First 5-0 we've had in quite a while. We've had quite a few 4-1s lately, but no 5-0s. This was kind of a nice 5-0 to get, especially as I'm getting ready. I was trying to get enough points to qualify for the Modern format playoff this coming weekend. I believe it's tomorrow, technically, although this league took place a couple days ago. But just wanted to show you guys that Burn still feels in a pretty good position, despite people being a little bit more prepared for it maybe than they were before last weekend. Played against a lot of decks. Played against Seismic Swans. We played against Blue White Control. We played against Jun. Played against Amulet. Lots of really interesting matchups. Kind of a wide spread of things. So, pretty nice 5-0. Was nice to get off the snide and get an undefeated league sometime this quarter. But anyways, want to thank everyone for tuning in today. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Check out our Patreon page if you'd like to help support the channel. This has been John for MTG Nexus with a 5-0 Burn League.